Okay. I'm gonna make a start. I guess people might still start coming through, but it'll be good to get going. So I'm gonna share my screen. Just bear with me one sec. So yes, welcome everybody. Thanks very much for having me here today. I'll start by giving a bit of an introduction to myself so you know who I am. But yeah, really appreciate everybody coming and giving me an opportunity to talk about one of my favorite subjects. So this is a webinar about how you can use animation to boost engagement with research. My name's Peter. I'm the owner of a digital communications company called Orinoco Communications, where we work exclusively with research organizations to help them disseminate and communicate their research. It's a company that I started in 2016 with that mission to help research organizations to more effectively communicate what they do. My background was in television documentaries, so the best way that I could think of doing that was through videos and animations. Since then, we have partnered with a number of research organizations, both here in the UK and in the US, most of which I would say have been working on projects related to health and medical research. So the reason that I created this webinar, and I've been offering it and delivering it to research organizations around the UK over the last few months, was because I know that there is generally speaking a big appetite amongst researchers for animation. Lots of people who are interested in the possibility of using animation to communicate their research. But if you haven't commissioned an animation before, worked with animation, I know that it can feel like a somewhat daunting prospect potentially. You may not know sort of where to start, who to approach, what to expect once the process is underway, how long that process might take, or importantly, how much it might cost to make an animation. So those are the topics that I'm going to be covering in the next half hour. And at the end of that 30 minutes, there'll be an opportunity, 15, 20, 30 minutes, however long people need or want, however long you can stick around to ask any questions that you might have. So the first thing to mention that even though every project is different, depending on who the target audience is, what the subject is, what the requirements are of the animation, the process of creating an animation is largely consistent. We certainly at Orinoco Communications have a set process that we use for every project. So once you know what to expect when you go into it, it can make you feel more at ease about what's going to happen once the process is underway. And the other thing to mention is that it is also very collaborative. So I know from experience that sometimes researchers have been a little bit apprehensive about the fact that perhaps, once you start working with a creative partner, that they'll kind of go off and create the animation and bring it to you as a done deal on delivery. But certainly the way that we work is highly collaborative with the research group all the way through from sort of the outset all the way through to delivery of the animation. And I'll talk you through some of those steps of the process momentarily. Start just by having a think about what animation is. And just to check, actually, Sean, maybe I've had issues before. Can you see what's on screen, or is the fact that I've got, is there anything that's obscured?
No, we can see the whole slide.
Okay, that's great. All right. So, yeah, animation, the sort of dictionary encyclopedia definition is just the art of making inanimate objects appear to move. That could be anything from a sort of simple flip book through to a complex feature-length Disney movie. And there are lots of different types of animation that can be used for research communication. One is sort of 3D animation, which lends itself to more sort of technical, scientific explainer videos. You could have a bit of fun with a stop motion animation, but The type of animation that I'm going to be talking about today and the type of animation that we predominantly create at Orinoco Communications is 2D digital animation. The reason that we focus on this is that for the purposes that we have of kind of creating explainers for public consumption largely, it's a highly effective way of communicating. It's also one of the more kind of cost-effective ways of doing animation compared to, say, 3D. And you can do it reasonably quickly, but we'll talk about timelines and what that means on a relative scale later on. So for the purposes of general kind of research communication, 2D digital animation normally is the way to go. It's also, as I said, highly effective at engaging audiences. I don't know how many of you are familiar with the TED YouTube channel, but it's a YouTube channel created by TED with educational video, animated content on there, all kind of 2D animations, and they have close to 20 million subscribers now. So it shows, you know, there really is a public appetite for this kind of content. Now, many of the organizations that we work with don't have the same kind of reach that TED does. But just to give you one sort of case study of how we use 2D animation to engage audiences is an example with the Physiological Society, who we worked with on a number of projects over a few years. They came to us a few years ago with an issue that when people were typing in what is physiology into Google, they got sent to their website and were met with this sort of dense block of text. And they stuck around for a few seconds, I think got overwhelmed by what was on there and tended to kind of head straight back out. So they wanted an animation, a short animated explainer to explain what physiology was in an accessible and engaging way. So that's what we did. I won't play that now, but here are some screenshots from the animation. And a few years later, it's now got close to 300,000 views on YouTube. And importantly, when you type in that question, what is physiology, it's not only the top ranked video on YouTube, but it also comes to the top of Google search. So it's been a great way for the society to engage audiences with their subject and then to get them in to watch more videos and to learn more about what the society does. Another way that we've used, that our clients have used animation is an example, the Game Change VR project, which is a project from a group of researchers at University of Oxford, psychiatrists who had a new virtual reality therapy for people suffering from social isolation. We created a 2-minute animation explaining some of the findings from that and the findings that were published in The Lancet. And the primary audience for that was clinicians, but the press picked up on it and it ended up featuring, for example, in this Guardian article about the study. So there are lots of different ways that animation can be used to drive traffic to your research, to kind of raise awareness about it. Generally speaking, one of the things to say is that normally we recommend that it's just one tool amongst a few, that you don't rely exclusively on the animation. You may have a website for your research that the animation would go on that explains what you're doing in more detail. It could be associated with a blog post that people can look to for more information, an infographic, an interactive report, or of course, an academic research paper. But animation we see very much as one part of a wider suite of possible communications tools for getting your research out there. So I'm going to talk a little bit now about how it's done. At Orinoco, we've sort of separated it out into 6 different phases. Here they are: discovery, script writing, storyboarding, design, illustration, animation, and sound design. So first up, the discovery phase. This is where everything kicks off. And this starts with a kind of a workshop or a meeting where we drill into this fundamental question of what do you want to achieve? What does this animation need to do? It could be a number of things. You may want to inspire school-age children. That was one of the goals of the What is Physiology animation, for example. You could be looking to recruit participants for a study, to keep patients informed about the progress of your research, share findings with other researchers, exchange knowledge with specialists from other disciplines, or alert funders to the important work that you're doing. Now, it could be a number of these different things, but one of the recommendations that we always give, and part of the discovery phase, is identifying 1 or 2 at most target audiences, the kind of key audiences that you're looking for your animation to resonate with. And one of the big things that we sort of unpick in that discovery session is what value your animation is going to provide to that particular audience, because people are there's an awful lot of information out there. There's an awful lot of digital content for people to choose from. They're likely to make a decision pretty quickly whether they give your particular video their attention. So they need to have a sense quite quickly of what value it's going to provide to them. And then the kind of creative approach is tailored around the sort of the tastes and the needs of that particular target audience, because what we find, generally speaking, is that a one-size-fits-all approach doesn't work. And when you try to appeal to too many audiences at once, the chances are that your video, your animation may not appeal to anybody. So yeah, very much kind of audience-focused approach. So yeah, crafting an animation around your audience's tastes and needs and requirements leads to greater impact and more shares. So the discovery phase is a lot about that. How do you know what your audience wants? I mean, simply the only way to find that out is to ask them. That doesn't necessarily mean you have to run massive involved focus groups. Just speaking to a small selection of people from your target audience at least is going to kind of give you some really interesting, useful insights to take into the creative process. You'll find out about what they need, what they respond well to, and also about their digital viewing habits. Where do they consume content? At what times? Is it on their mobile devices, on their computers? All of this is going to be really helpful to feed back into how you go about creating that animation. Also, importantly, do ask if they're happy to be involved. I know that lots of the researchers here will probably be working with patient groups. That's a great way of having feedback from your sort of target audience, your community throughout the process, to find out at the different phases that I'm going to go through now, whether or not the stuff that you're creating is resonating with them and sort of suits their needs. Once we've sort of had that feedback and we know what we're aiming for, we'll go and put together a bit of a mood board. This is the first sort of sense of what design direction we might take. That again is likely to be shared with any patient groups or whoever it might be, stakeholders, to see what they like about the ideas that are being put forward. And then off the back of that, we'll come up with a creative direction that we can take into the project. The next phase is the script writing. So even though animation is a very visual medium, everything starts with a script, with the writing. Here's a little short sort of example of the beginning of a script. So on one side, you'll have the early visual ideas mapped out through text. And on the right-hand side, you'll have the voiceover or the narration, what you're going to hear as you see the visuals on screen. So getting the key messages across is one of the most important things for the script, getting the story, making sure that everything flows through. This is, as I said earlier, a highly collaborative part of the process for us. So we know how to make animation. You know how the ins and outs of your research and hopefully something of your target audience. So working together is the best way, obviously, to come up with a script that works. We'll create a first draft. You would then review it and send your feedback. And we do a number of iterations until we get that locked down. For us, we do 3 rounds of revisions on the script alone, because in part, the easiest time to make changes is at this stage. Once you start trying to mess around with it further on down the process with animation, it can get tricky. So it's really important to get this right. It's also important to time it. With animation, I'll talk about budgets and costs in a bit, but generally speaking, the longer it goes on for, the longer the duration of the animation, the more it's going to cost, because you need to design more, you need to animate more, you need to do more sound design. Everything takes longer, and time causes increased costs. So usually our animations, the ones that we create, we're aiming for about 2.5 minutes long, 2 to 2.5 minutes. That seems to work well with online audiences as well, in terms of the amount of attention they're willing to give something. So that's normally what we're aiming for. And during the script phase is where you make sure that when you're reading it through, it's going to time. After the script has been locked, we move on to the storyboard. This is a series of rough sketches where we map out the scenes. At this point, changes are still quite easy. You can see that the sketches are quite rough. Sometimes it won't even have color. You'll just sort of have black and white sort of stick figures and so on, just to get a sense of how one scene flows from one to the next. Once that's been signed off, then we move into the design illustration phase, where those rough sketches are converted into final designs. After this point, the changes do become more difficult again, so it's really important that everybody who needs to see it and eventually sign off on it has seen it at this point to give their thoughts. Once those illustrations have been signed off, then you move into the animation phase, and that's where the designs are brought to life with movement and transitions. This is a really exciting phase where the life is first sort of breathed into those still images. Last, but certainly not least, is sound design. This is a phase that's often quite overlooked, but yeah, good sound design adds a huge amount to the quality of an animation. And in my opinion, it's the difference between something that's just sort of okay compared to something that really stands out. So it's really important to dedicate enough time and expertise to that phase of the production. I'm just going to take a moment. I'll play through. So all the sketches and the storyboards and the script bits you saw are from that game change animation that I showed you a glimpse of earlier before, that was shared on the Guardian article. So as I said, this was for a research group from Oxford University who were looking to share news about some very successful clinical trial for their virtual therapy to help people with social isolation. So I'm going to play it now. Hopefully, Sean, do you give me a shout if this doesn't, if you can't hear it, but hopefully it works.
I was missing out on quite a lot. I couldn't go out and see my friends and family. The biggest one for me was going up to visit my dad's grave, because in my mind, I couldn't physically get the bus to go up there. It was heartbreaking.
Game Change is a landmark virtual reality therapy for people with psychosis who are anxious about everyday social situations. Over 6 sessions, patients practice being in simulations of common scenarios, such as a cafe, shop, street, and bus. Game Change is automated. A virtual coach guides the patient through the program, so the therapy can be supported by a range of staff: peer support workers, assistant psychologists, or CBT therapists. That increases access, helping to get Game Change to all those who need it. Most importantly, Game Change works. The results of a large clinical trial published in The Lancet Psychiatry and involving 346 patients with psychosis show big improvements for people who had previously found it difficult even to leave their home. After Game Change, they can get on with living the life they want to lead.
Game Change therapy changed my life. I've been able to get the bus to my dad's grave. I'm more confident in myself. I'm more confident around other people. I see Game Change helping everyone. I think everyone's going to be using it.
Okay. Oh, let me see it again. Hold on. Sorry, see if I can get through that. So that sort of, yeah, shows a culmination of all those different phases. Many rounds of feedback have gone into that, and that featured patient testimony. It was an actor's voice because they didn't want their own voice to be featured, but includes patient tests. The voice, essentially, the words of a patient who'd benefited from the therapy. There is a 7th phase. I said 6 phases of production. There's a 7th phase to consider, and that is dissemination. Because the last thing you want is, after all the effort you've gone into it and the cost and so on, is to just stick it up on a department website and hope for the best, and your animation sort of languishes, lost and forgotten without being seen by anybody. It can happen. It doesn't happen too often, thankfully, because we do give some recommendations of what people can do with the animation once it's delivered. It's really important to think about who might be interested in sharing your animation, because the reach of your own research group is likely to be only so far. So who might be interested in sharing it? The obvious choices are your sort of university department, perhaps, your university as a whole. Speak to the central comms team and see if it's something that they'd be able to share with their own networks, because obviously a university's reach is going to be that much greater. Advocacy groups, anybody who is representing the patients that perhaps your research benefits, or likewise any charities. Also have a think about influencers. Now, influencers often, you might associate with sort of fashion brands and so on, but there are likely to be influential people who have large followings on social media within any community. So identifying who those people are, making sure that they know about your animation and that they can share it amongst their own networks as well, is a really great way of getting it out there, regardless of who your target audience is. There's always going to be somebody who's got a good following with the kind of people that you want to reach. So it's worth identifying who those are. Next, I want to talk a bit about time, how long it takes and how much it costs, because these are probably the two questions that we most commonly get asked. So yeah, I want to finish off the webinar discussing those. This is a sort of little example of the kind of email that we often get sent from research groups who are getting in touch. So it says, hello, I'm a researcher at whatever university, and I'm involved with a research project doing X, Y, and Z. We're coming to the end of our 4-year project, and we'd like an animation to help us share our findings. We want the animation to be 2 minutes long, and we would like to show it at a conference that's happening in 6 weeks' time. Please, can you let me know if this is something you can help with and how much it will cost? So first, on the question of time, the timeline. Looking at this email, you can see they want to deliver it. They need something. They need to use this animation in just 6 weeks' time. For us, that would be tight. 6 weeks to go through all those phases is not very long. And once you know about the process, that's why I've gone to lengths to explain it. You can understand why, everything that's involved, all the different rounds of feedback and so on. On average, we're looking at 3 to 4 months to make a 2 to 3 minute animation. And that might be 3 weeks worth of solid work, but that, generally speaking, has to get spread across a period of time to allow everybody enough time to feed back and so on. So what does that mean if you're considering commissioning an animation? If you know you need it delivered, find out, well, yeah, think about the date that you want it delivered, track back 4 months, and that's the time at which you should be starting to probably make that animation. 3 months might be fine, but 4 months is ideal. And then if it's going to take you a couple of months to kind of write a creative brief, get that sent out, identify and select a creative partner to work with, then you might be thinking, it's probably sensible to be thinking 6 months ahead of time about sort of getting the ball rolling with that. If you allow enough time, that means that there gives plenty of time for stakeholders to review and give feedback at all those different stages, and enough time for the creative team to come up with novel, engaging ways to tell the story of your research. So it's worth spending time over. Now, on to cost. And this is probably the biggest question that people ask us, is how much it's going to cost. So as you can see there in the email, the only information we have to work with here in this email is that the animation is 2 minutes long. So duration is an important consideration, but it's very much just one consideration when we come up with an estimate. So whenever we get an email like this, the first thing is for us to jump on a call with the person and just find out more information about their project, about what they're looking to achieve, to give us the information that we need to start coming up with at least a ballpark figure of how much it might cost. So one of the main questions I'll always ask in that conversation is, what is your budget? And it's a question that can sometimes come up with a little bit of resistance from people, and I do understand that. I think if you don't know how much an animation costs, you're sort of unwilling perhaps to kind of venture a guess, which is fair enough. The other thing is, I think if people say the maximum amount that they have to spend on something potentially, the person they're speaking to is just going to go, okay, fine, we'll spend that much. That's great. So whilst I can understand those reservations, it is really important when you're speaking with people who you're looking to work with that you at least have a sense of what you might be willing to spend, because as you can imagine, there's a huge amount of difference in, depending on the complexity of the animation and so on, how much an animation can cost. So it's really important for us to have at least a range of figures of what we might be able to work with. I could tell you that from our point of view, generally speaking, when we're working on a project, for a one-off animation of around 2.5 minutes long, the kind that you saw just then, the Game Change VR animation, is about £10,000 plus VAT, because yeah, we have to factor that in as well. So £10,000 for a 2.5 minute animation. There is some wiggle room on that. We can go a little bit lower if it's a simpler approach. It can also cost more if there's sort of extra requirements and so on. But hopefully that's useful for you to kind of have a sense of what you might be looking at for that kind of output. There is the option, of course, of going with freelancers, and I certainly wouldn't necessarily discourage that. There are some amazing freelance animators out there for sure. I think just the thing that I would urge is if you do go down that route, if you perhaps don't have the budget to work with an agency like ours, is when you're speaking with the freelancers, make sure that not only do they know how to create a nice looking animation, which is obviously a key part of it, but they also are going to be able to help you with the writing and the communication side of things, to sort of making sure that your key messages are coming across and resonating with the target audience, that they can strategize in that sense of sort of working out, digging into those questions about what you want to achieve and how best you're going to be able to achieve it. And also that they can kind of give you a sense that they're going to be able to manage the project as well, because there's, as you've seen, lots of moving parts and lots of points at which, if things start slipping, they can really start to slip. So somebody who is not only able to create the animation, but who can kind of manage that project is going to be really important. When you're putting together a brief, if you need to sort of put out a brief in order to tender and get quotes, then as discussed, I would urge you to put at least an indicative budget on there, because it's going to really help people when they're submitting applications and getting in touch with you to know what they're working with and what they might be able to achieve. At least know what you think you're going to be willing to spend when you go into those conversations, even if you don't put it on the brief. Finally, I want to talk a little bit about funding. So how do you get the money to do the animations? Generally speaking, when we're working with research groups, funding will have come from the original grant, and they will have had some money earmarked for dissemination. Often people come to us at the end of their project and they tell us how much they have, and often, unfortunately, because it wasn't enough, because they didn't know how much they should be asking for, it makes it difficult to work with groups in those circumstances, but we'll always try to make things work whenever possible. Obviously, if you don't have any funds, you can't make the animation. So the important time is when you're applying for the grant. That's the best time to ask for the money, obviously. There are pots, I would say, available. Recently, we started working with a group who were coming to the end of a 4-year-long project, I think it was. They actually applied for funding specifically for dissemination through an NIHR pot of money that enabled them now to create an animation at the end. But the best time to ask is at the beginning. So if you are putting together a grant application and you're interested in animation, the first thing to consider is how many animations do you need? Obviously, the dissemination aspect is one, but you may want to use an animation at the beginning to raise awareness about your project, to help recruit participants and so on. Perhaps you want one in the middle if it's going to be a long project to sort of communicate your progress so far, and then one at the end to share your findings or to accompany a research publication. Consider also naming a creative partner in the application. If you've spoken with somebody who you want to work with, then it can be beneficial to put their name down and a short blurb about who they are and what their sort of specialist expertise in the area is, for funders to know that you've already started thinking about this and that you've identified somebody who's qualified and able to do a good job. I think puts their mind at ease. So it might well be worth naming a creative partner. If you're nervous still about the sort of asking for what might deem too much, I think it's worth noting that one project, a different project that we're starting to work on at the moment, again NIHR funded, the total value of that award, of that research grant, is £250,000 for a 2-year research project. They asked for £15,000 for 2 animations, one for recruitment and one for dissemination, which is, I think, if my calculations are correct, but probably somebody in the room could tell me if they're not, 7% of the total. And it was it was approved by the NHIP without any pushback. So I will acknowledge that with that particular research project, the final animation is kind of one of the outputs of the research itself. So that won't always be, you know, a sensible percentage, obviously, to put in. But I think it just goes to show that if the funders appreciate the requirement and the need and the impact that an animation is going to have to help increase the impact of the research itself, then they are, generally speaking, seem very happy to fund it. That, I think, is everything from me. So thank you very much for your time. I hope I didn't rattle through it all too quickly, that you're able to take some of it in. I'm going to be sharing these slides later in a follow-up email. So you will have an opportunity to kind of look through them again. I've got as long as you need now to answer any questions. So yeah, please feel free to go ahead. Anybody? I'm not sure how I'm going to invigilate the questions. I don't know if I'm going to be best placed to do that or if somebody else will. But yeah, if anybody wants to, either in the chat or I guess ideally.
No, hello, Vida. I think I can't find a hand to put up or anything. As a kind of thing, have you come across kind of situations where an organisation has come to you and kind of you've pushed back and kind of go, actually, I don't think animation is the right way to go. If people are just going to go, oh, animation, that's all new and shiny, but actually isn't appropriate.
Yeah, the answer is yes. I mean, that would have been one of the first things to say in the qualifying call. I mean, generally speaking, you know, it's difficult for us to make that call to an extent because we won't know how big the dissemination, sort of what there is available to spend generally. I would sort of certainly advise, as I said, you know, against perhaps throwing everything at an animation and hoping that miraculously that's going to sort of have the reach and so on and the impact that people want it to. One of the things that we're encouraging people at the moment to do is I think animation is always likely to be a great way to at least kind of raise awareness and drive traffic to wherever it is you want them to go. But yeah, there are sort of increasingly, there are some really great free to use tools available. One platform, for example, is Shorthand, that allows you to create, it's a sort of a digital storytelling platform, but it's a great way of quite simply putting together you can talk about your research. It's sort of essentially on a web page, and it gives people the opportunity to dig a bit deeper into the research, because animation is always going to be an introduction. You know, you've got 2 minutes to talk about your research. You're only ever going to be able to go so deep. So chances are there's always going to be a requirement to do something else as well. So the question is, how do you do that? And platforms like Shorthand are a great way of doing it. If you already have a website, or you're sort of, you know, your group is on the department website, then you can point them in that direction as well. I think the other thing to note as well from the dissemination side of things is to consider if there are ways to sort of chunk that longer animation into shorter bits so that you can sort of be putting them out on social media and yeah, rather than just creating a single animation and using that, you can always try to think of ways to share it more widely and in as varied forms as possible. But yeah, so to answer your question, we have sometimes advised that, you know, they might think of other ways, and we also create infographics and, as I say, help with platforms like Shorthand. But yeah, using animation as one tool in a suite rather than hoping it's going to be the way to do everything. Generally the best approach. Thank you. I hope that helped. Emma asks, you mentioned TED-Ed, how easy is it to share your animation on that platform? Sharing it on TED-Ed, I think, would be pretty difficult. They commission animations specifically. I mean, I think the only way to do it would be to approach TED-Ed with an idea. So some way of communicating your research, you know, in a way that suits the style that they do, going along with a creative partner as well, an animator, probably an individual, because I know the budgets for TED Ed are pretty small, so probably you'd be looking at working with an individual for that potentially. But yeah, seeing what they think, and if they commission it, then that would be the way to do it. But I think you would struggle to go in with an animation that's already been created and give it to them to share on the platform. Sarah Myers says, I'm working on a project where I think animation may be a useful tool to find patient preferences for autistic children. Are there any recommendations for people to approach? And people, I'm not sure who you mean by people in that. So if you could potentially elaborate, Sarah, do you? Yeah, if you mean creative partners, then, you know, by all means, I'd be very happy to have a chat with you about it. If you mean sort of specialists in terms of, okay, perfect. Yeah, that would be great. Would love to hear more about the project and see if there's anything that we can do to help. But as I say, you know, I'm always looking for ways to help people. If it makes sense to go with sort of a freelancer, we're always happy to make that suggestion as well. But yeah, it'll be great to hear more. So please do get in touch. I'll share my contact details afterwards as well. Is it possible to include video in an animation? James is asking. I'm doing a project where I'll fill in some video clips of people giving their views and wondered if these could form part of an animation. Yes, absolutely. We've done that before ourselves. Afterwards, if anybody wants any specific reference videos, I can share those as part of the follow-up. Yeah, that actually is often a really good way of doing it. If you want to hear directly from, say, a researcher talking about their work, which is often a really engaging way of doing it, they can be speaking straight into the camera. People respond well to hearing from people. And then animation can you can cut away to animation from more documentary style footage, and animation can be a kind of a way of maybe explaining a specific concept, something that you can't really sort of explain easily through filmed material. Or you can even incorporate animation, you know, you can have both working at the same time and have sort of animation superimposed. There are loads of different ways of doing it. Again, if you want to speak about your particular project, then do please feel free to get in touch. And yeah, be very happy to hear about what you've got in mind and give you advice on how you might be able to go about that. But yeah, that's a great way of doing it for sure. Laura Coulthard has included a link to an animation that she co-produced with a young persons group. So yeah, I can include a link to that as well in the follow-up as well. Cost about 3.5K, but this was in 2020. I'd be interested, I don't know if Laura, you're happy to talk a bit about how the approach that you used for that, whether it was with an individual or yeah, whether it was a positive experience. I don't know how many people on this call have actually tried using animation before and found it effective, or if they have any experiences they'd like to share. Or of course, if anybody else has any questions. Sean, is there anything you feel I could elaborate on more, or?
No, that was brilliant. Thank you. And if no one has any more questions, I will end the recording. And we can send out any support and documentation within the next couple of days.
Great. Yeah, I'll certainly send that through. And yeah, as I said, if honestly, if anybody has any further questions, I'm always really happy to just jump on a call and chat about ideas, whatever stage they're at. And obviously no pressure whatsoever. I won't be sort of doing the hard sell. I'll just kind of, yeah, I always enjoy chatting about animation and ideas. So yeah, please do feel free to get in touch or connect with me on LinkedIn or wherever it might be. That'd be great. Thanks.